Close your eyes and imagine the year 1428. A group of men enters a cemetery, exhumes a corpse that has been underground for 44 years, and under orders from the church, they burn it until only dust remains. He was not just any criminal. He was a Bible translator. They did this to ensure that he would have no place in the resurrection. This fear of fire programmed the Western mind for centuries. But were they right, or were they just medieval superstitions? The truth about your mortal remains begins now. The hidden history of burial. To begin with, we have to understand that the decision to burn or bury was never neutral. Basically, in the ancient world, your funeral said which god you served. If we travel to the 1st century, the Roman Empire functioned with fire. For an average Roman, the body was a prison. The philosophy of the time, influenced by Greek thinkers, said that the soul was trapped in the flesh. So, when you lost your life, cremation was the great escape. They put the body on a wooden pyre, lit the fire, and watched how the smoke rose, believing that the soul was released toward the stars. But here is the catch. The first Christians appeared on the scene and said, no, absolutely no. They rejected cremation in a radical way. And it was not because they liked digging holes 6 feet deep. It was because they inherited the Jewish vision of the body. For a Jew and a Christian of the 1st century, the body was not a jail. It was a direct creation of God, molded from the dust in Genesis. What most ignore is that Christianity introduced a revolutionary concept, dormition. They did not say he passed away, they said he sleeps, and if someone sleeps, you expect them to wake up. Burying the body intact, washed and wrapped in linen, was an act of prophetic faith. They were saying, this body is going to be used again. They imitated the burial of Jesus in the borrowed tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. If Jesus was buried and resurrected with a physical body, his followers wanted exactly the same thing. And listen to this. The difference was so obvious that it became a visual marketing tool. The Roman historian Tacitus and other pagans noted that Christians execrated the funeral pyres. While Rome smelled of smoke, the Christian catacombs filled with whole bodies waiting for the final trumpet blast. Toward the year 400 after Christ, when Christianity took control of the empire, cremation practically disappeared from Europe. It became a taboo. Burning a body was associated with paganism, with denying the resurrection, and ironically, with eternal punishment. But history has a dark twist, since the Church, which defended the dignity of the body, began to use fire as a weapon of theological terror. Without a doubt, one of the most shocking moments of Christian history occurred in medieval England. You have to know the story of John Wycliffe. This guy was a brilliant theologian, the morning star of the Reformation, famous for translating the Bible into English so that the common people could read it. He passed away from a stroke in 1384 and was buried peacefully in consecrated ground. End of the story, right? Well, no. Here comes the trick. The Catholic Church of the time despised his teaching so much that 44 years after his departure, at the Council of Constance, they decided that being buried was too good for him. In the year 1428, the Bishop of Lincoln sent a crew to the cemetery. Imagine the scene. Men with shovels exhuming bones that had been underground for more than 4 decades. They took him out, burned his bones, until they turned into ash and threw those ashes into the River Swift. Why do all that effort for a skeleton? Basically, they wanted to erase him from history, and according to the superstition of the time, complicate his resurrection. They believed that by dispersing his remains in the water that flowed toward the ocean, his body could never reunite on Judgment Day. It was the supreme insult. This event cemented an idea in the European mind. Fire is for heretics, witches, and waste. During the next 500 years, if you were a good Christian, you were buried. If you were an enemy of the faith, you were burned. Fire became synonymous with hell. In the collective mind, putting a loved one in an oven was like sending them voluntarily to damnation, and that is saying little. Ecclesiastical laws prohibited cremation under penalty of excommunication. It was seen as an act of defiance, a Masonic cry against the faith. The freethinkers and atheists of the 19th century began to ask for cremation precisely for that, to mock the church and say, "Look, I burn and I am not afraid of your resurrection." But, although it is not that simple, technology and hygiene were about to collide with theology in a way that no one saw coming. We fast forward to the end of the 19th century, where the Industrial Revolution had changed the game. Cities like London and Paris were overcrowded, and with so many living people, there were too many people who had departed. The cemeteries were overflowing. Literally, there was no space to put one more body. People began to report horrible smells and miasmatic vapors coming out of the shallow graves in the urban centers. The fear of diseases was real. So this is the deal. The doctors and scientists, the hygienists, began to press for cremation, not for religious reasons, but for public health. They said, "We are poisoning the water with our dead." In 1870, the first modern crematorium was built in Italy and shortly after in England. But the religious resistance remained brutal. People saw the industrial ovens and thought of hell. However, something curious happened. Figures of high society and, surprisingly, some religious leaders began to change the script. In 1908, the Dean of Westminster Abbey asked to be cremated. This was a shock. A leader of the church saying, "It is okay to burn me." His logic was overwhelming. God is almighty. If God could create Adam from dust, can he not rebuild a man from his ashes? Basically, the theological argument changed from, "How dare you destroy the body?" to, "Do you perhaps doubt the power of God to rebuild it?" Cremation began to lose its stigma of heresy and to gain the label of hygienic modernity. But the Catholic Church, the largest and oldest denomination, still had the forbidden sign hanging on the door, and they would not take it down without a discussion. What most ignore is that this transition was not smooth. There were fierce debates, accusations of paganism and divided families, but the two world wars were about to force the hand of theology. When you have millions of bodies on the battlefield, the individual luxury burial ceases to be an option. From prohibition to tolerance. The year is 1963. The world is changing, and the Catholic Church decides that it is time to update its funeral laws. Pope Paul VI issues an instruction with an elegant Latin name, Piam et Constantem. And note the fact, this was an earthquake. For the first time in centuries, Rome said, "Okay, you can be cremated." But, and it is a big but, there were strict conditions. The Church did not say cremation is great. It said, it is not prohibited, as long as you do not do it to deny the resurrection. Basically, if you burned yourself because you were an atheist and wanted to mock God, it was still a sin. But if you did it for hygiene, economy, or necessity, it was okay. But here is the catch that many Catholics today ignore. The Church lifted the prohibition, but did not change its preference. Burial remained the VIP of funerals. Why? Because symbolism matters. To bury is to sow, to burn is to destroy. Even so, the door was open. In 1997, they took another giant step. They allowed the urns with ashes to be present at the funeral mass. Before that, you had to take the body, do the mass, and then go to the crematorium. Now the urn could be in front of the altar. This normalized cremation for millions of faithful in America and Europe. However, the Vatican had to pull the handbrake recently. In 2016, they took out an urgent reminder because people were becoming too creative. They said, "No scattering the ashes in the sea like in the movies, no making diamonds with grandpa, and no having the urn on the fireplace mantle." For the Church, ashes are body, and the body must be in a sacred place, cemetery, waiting for the final day. Treating ashes like a souvenir or throwing them to the wind is considered a brutal lack of respect toward the temple of the Holy Spirit. And that is saying little, because while the Catholics were setting rules, the Protestants in the United States were about to turn cremation into the #1 norm, driven by something much more powerful than theology, money. We are going to talk about numbers, because at the end of the day, funeral services are expensive. In the United States, the average cost of a traditional funeral with burial, we are talking about preparation of the body, hardwood casket, concrete vault, headstone, and the plot in the cemetery, easily rounds $8,000 to $10,000, and that if you do not get fancy. For a middle-class family that lives day to day, that is a devastating debt. On the other hand, direct cremation costs between $1,500 and $2,500. Without a doubt, the difference is abysmal. It is simple math. And in an unstable economy, the pocket often wins over tradition. The statistics confirm it. In 2017, cremation surpassed burial in the United States for the first time in history, reaching 50.2%. And listen to this. Projections say that for the year 2035, almost 80% of Americans will choose fire, almost 8 out of every 10. Traditional funeral homes are entering panic or adapting by buying their own ovens. It is no longer a matter of heretics against believers. It is a matter of, can I pay the mortgage or do I pay for the casket? In addition, the mobility factor enters. In antiquity, you lived and ended your days in the same village. Today, people move from New York to Florida and then to Texas. Buying a cemetery plot in a place where your grandchildren will never go to visit seems absurd to many. An urn is portable. Although the church disapproves of moving it, people do it. Or simply, the idea of not occupying space attracts a generation conscious of the environment that sees cemeteries as a waste of green land. But although the wallet rules, the Bible has something to say about the value of the body that goes beyond the market price. To answer that, we have to leave history and enter the dangerous terrain of the Bible itself, beginning with a historical exception that will surprise many. To begin with, if you look in the Old Testament for a clear prohibition with a neon sign that says, "Thou shalt not cremate," you are not going to find it. The 11th commandment against fire does not exist, but what we do find are brutal stories that give us clues. And without a doubt, the most important is the fall of King Saul. We are in the year 1010 before Christ approximately. The battle on Mount Gilboa has been a total disaster for Israel. The Philistines have crushed the Hebrew army. King Saul has perished. His 3 sons, including Jonathan, David's best friend, have also fallen. But the humiliation did not end there. The Philistines found the bodies, took their heads as war trophies, and nailed their headless corpses to the walls of the city of Beth-shan so that they would decompose publicly. It was a tactic of psychological terror. But here is the catch. The brave men of Jabesh-Gilead, an allied city, found out about this. They could not allow such dishonor to the anointed of God. So they organized a night commando operation. They marched all night, infiltrated the enemy lines, took the bodies down from the wall, and took them back to Jabesh. And listen to this. 1 Samuel 31 verse 12 explicitly says, "And came to Jabesh, and burnt them there." Wait, they burned them? A king of Israel? Yes. But note the fact, they did not burn them until they disappeared completely. Verse 13 says that later they took their bones and buried them under a tree. This is crucial. It was not a Roman-style cremation to release the soul. It was a sanitary and honor measure. The bodies were in an advanced state of decomposition after days exposed to the Middle Eastern sun. Burning the flesh was a dignified way to handle dangerous biological remains, leaving the bones, the durable structure, for a respectful burial. The Bible narrates this as an act of heroism, not of heresy. David, who would be the next king, later praised these men for their mercy and loyalty. He did not tell them, "You have sinned for using fire." He told them, "Blessed be ye." This sets a massive precedent. Fire in extreme circumstances of war or dishonor is not sin. It is a tool, but do not be confused. Although Saul was an accepted exception, the general rule remained the earth, and there was a very dark reason for that. The theology of bad fire. Basically, the reason why the Jews preferred to bury was not just tradition, it was theological trauma. In the Bible, fire is almost always the weapon of divine prosecutors. Think of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. Fire and sulfur fall from the sky to erase entire cities for their wickedness. Fire here does not purify, it eradicates. And listen to this. The Mosaic law used fire as the definitive capital punishment for aberrant crimes. Leviticus 20 verse 14 says that if a man commits certain serious immoral acts, they shall be burnt. Leviticus 21 verse 9 says that if the daughter of a priest falls into prostitution, she shall be burnt with fire. But here comes the trick. Most biblical scholars agree that this did not mean burning them alive, but executing them first, generally by stoning, and then burning their corpses as a sign of absolute contempt. It was a way of saying, this person does not even deserve to return to the earth of their parents. The most famous case is that of Achan in Joshua 7. This man stole consecrated objects in the Battle of Jericho. When they discovered him, they took him to the valley of Achor. And all Israel stoned him, and they burnt them with fire after they had stoned them. Note the order. First the stone, then the fire. Cremation here was the mark of the curse. It was erasing the sin from the camp. Another brutal example is in Amos 2, verse 1. God pronounces judgment against Moab, an enemy nation. Why? Because he burnt the bones of the king of Edom into lime. Look closely. God was not angry because they burned a fresh body. He was furious because they profaned the tomb of an enemy, took out the bones and burned them to make lime. It was the maximum insult, turning a king into mixture for walls. So, for an ancient Jew, burning a body was associated with three things: garbage, the valley of Hinnom or Gehenna, where waste was burned, criminal punishment or total contempt. For that reason, burial was the norm of the righteous. Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah for 400 shekels of silver, only to ensure that Sarah was buried, not burned. Joseph made his brothers swear that they would carry his bones, not his ashes, from Egypt to the Promised Land. But does this apply to Christians today, or did everything change when the New Testament arrived? Because there is a man named Paul who used an agricultural analogy that changed the rules of the game forever. What most ignore is that the Apostle Paul had to face very technical questions about death. In the Church of Corinth, people asked, "But how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come?" Basically, they were worried about the mechanics of the resurrection. In 1 Corinthians 15, verses 35 to 44, Paul gives them a class on spiritual biology, and he uses the image of a seed. He says, "That which thou sowest is not quickened, except it die. Think of a grain of wheat. When you put it in the earth, that grain decomposes. It falls apart. It ceases to exist as a grain to become a new plant." Paul says, "It is sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory." Here is the key. The physical body that we have now is the seed. The resurrection body is the plant. They are not identical. One is weak biological material, the other is powerful spiritual material. But here is the detail. The defenders of burial say, exactly, Paul says, sow. You sow in the earth, not in the fire. You cannot sow a seed if you burn it first. And linguistically they have a point. The Greek word implies putting something in the ground. However, the defenders of cremation respond, it is a metaphor, not a gardening manual. Paul's point is the transformation, not the method of disposal. Whether the body decomposes slowly during 50 years in the earth or is reduced to ashes in 2 hours in an oven, the final chemical result is the same. Dust. Dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. God did not say, dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return, but only if you take 20 years in the process. The Bible makes it clear that our current bodies do not enter heaven just as they are. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. 1 Corinthians 15:50. We need a total upgrade. So theologically, the state of your physical remains, whether they are dry bones, dust, or ash, is irrelevant to the power of God. He does not recycle your old atoms. He gives you a new existence based on your redeemed identity. But although God can do it, many Christians argue that we should not destroy the body voluntarily, focusing on the ownership of it. Yes, about that. If you are a Christian, the Bible clearly says that you are not the owner of yourself. 1 Corinthians 6:19 is the hammer that the opponents of cremation use. What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own? For conservative theologians this is decisive. If your body was the house of God on earth, why would you want to set it on fire when you move out? They argue that burial is an act of reverence. It is laying the body down with care, like a mother lays down a sleeping child, waiting for them to wake up. Burning it feels violent. It feels like saying, I no longer need this, discard it. Think of it this way. If you had a gold chalice that Jesus used at the Last Supper and it got dented, would you melt it down to make ingots, or would you keep it in a velvet box even if it were broken? The body of the believer has been washed by the blood of Christ, has participated in the Holy Supper, has been an instrument of righteousness. Actively destroying it with fire seems to contradict the love that we should have for what God created. In addition, Christianity has always been a materialist religion in the good sense. Unlike the Gnostics, who believed that matter was bad and spirit good, Christians believe that matter is good. God became flesh in Jesus. Jesus rose with flesh and bones. By burying the body, we validate that matter matters. We say that the body is not a disposable shell, but an integral part of who we are. The critics of cremation say that fire erases that distinction. It turns a person into a thing, ash. The industrial process of cremation is seen by many as unnecessary violence against the image of God. But what happens with the martyrs? What happens with the Christians who lose their lives in fires or explosions? If fire is so bad, are they at a disadvantage? Here is where the argument for cremation wins its trump card: the sovereignty of God. God does not need your original atoms. What most ignore is that if cremation prevented the resurrection, then thousands of the greatest saints in history are lost. During the Reformation and the Roman Empire, thousands of Christians were burned alive at the stake for their faith. Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, Jan Hus, William Tyndale. Their bodies were reduced to ashes and scattered to the winds or rivers precisely to mock their hope of resurrection. If we believe that cremation harms the Christian, we have to admit that the executioners won. But no serious Christian theologian believes that. The Church has always taught that the martyrs will rise with special honor. Therefore, the physical state of the remains cannot be an obstacle for God. And listen to this. Let's think about the shark argument. If a missionary falls into the sea and is attacked by a shark, his body disappears in the ocean. His atoms become part of the shark. Then the shark perishes and decomposes. Those atoms are dispersed throughout the Pacific. Is God confused? Is he searching the bottom of the sea saying, "Oops, I'm missing a femur"? Of course not. God is the creator of the atoms. He upholds the universe with the word of his power. Rebuilding a body, whether from ashes in an urn, from dust in a casket, or from molecules dispersed in the sea, is child's play for him. The resurrection is a miracle, not a natural process in reverse. So the theological argument of "do not cremate because it prevents resurrection" is honestly a heresy in itself, because it limits the power of God. It suggests that God needs our help to resurrect us. He does not need it. Basically, the debate boils down to this: burial is a better symbol, but cremation is not an unforgivable sin. The Bible prefers burial for what it communicates, but it does not prohibit cremation because it does not affect eternal security. But theory is one thing and practice is another. What do you do with the urn? Do you put it on the mantle? This is where modern Christians are crossing dangerous lines. To begin with, let's talk about a trend that has exploded in the last 20 years. They hand you the urn and you take it home. You put it on the fireplace next to the wedding photos and the television. It seems like an act of love, right? You want to have them close. But here is the catch. Most Christian theologians, especially in the Catholic and liturgical tradition, consider this a serious lack of respect and a potential psychological problem. In 2016, the Vatican had to intervene with a document called Ad Resurgendum Cum Christo. It was a direct response to this phenomenon. The Church said clearly, the ashes should not be kept in the home. Why? Basically for three reasons that most ignore. First, it privatizes death. Christians believe that the end of life is not just a family event, but a community one. The deceased is part of the Church, the community of saints. By locking the remains in a private house, you rob the community of the right to remember, pray, and visit the grave. You turn the deceased into an exclusive private possession, almost like a collector's item. Second, and this is the craziest thing, the risk of accidental profanation is very high. What happens when you are gone? Your children or grandchildren inherit the house. They find great-grandfather's urn in the attic. They have no emotional connection with him. For them, it is an old piece of junk. There are real and documented stories of urns bought at garage sales, auctioned in abandoned storage units, or, worse yet, thrown in the trash during a move. By not burying the ashes, you condemn your ancestors to be forgotten or treated as debris in just 2 generations. And third, it prevents grieving. Psychologists warn that keeping the physical remains in the living room can freeze the process of acceptance. There is no final goodbye. The person is still there, watching from the mantle. For the Christian, the departure is toward God, not a static permanence in a ceramic jar. The burial, or columbarium, marks a necessary end. You have gone to be with the Lord. Having the urn at home erases that line and creates a kind of morbid domestic sanctuary. But if you think that having them at home is controversial, wait until you see what people do in parks, beaches, and soccer stadiums. Without a doubt, the most cinematic image of cremation is the scattering of ashes. We see in movies how someone climbs a mountain at sunset and throws the dust to the wind while sad music plays. Or they throw it into the sea from a sailboat. It sounds beautiful, it sounds free, but for Orthodox Christian theology, this is a spiritual minefield. So here is the deal. The act of scattering the ashes communicates a very specific idea. I am becoming part of the universe. It is the idea that you merge with nature, with the ocean, with the wind. That is pure pantheism, not Christianity. Christianity teaches that you are a unique individual, created by God, and that you will maintain your identity for all eternity. You do not dissolve into cosmic energy, you rise as you. By scattering the ashes, symbolically you are saying, "Here ends my individuality." You are erasing the place of memory. There is no headstone where your descendants can go to say, "Here lies John." There is an anonymous ocean or a giant forest. You are erasing your history. The Catholic Church explicitly prohibits scattering for this reason. They see it as a declaration that death is the absolute end of the person, a fusion with nothingness. In addition, there is a practical and legal aspect that is quite unpleasant. And listen to this. Disneyland has a secret protocol for this. So many people try to scatter the ashes of their loved ones in the Haunted Mansion or Pirates of the Caribbean attraction that the park has special cleaning codes to vacuum human remains. Imagine that your grandmother ends up in the bag of an industrial vacuum cleaner. Is that dignity? The same happens in soccer stadiums. Scattering dad on the goal line sounds good until the players run over him, and the groundskeeper cuts the grass on Monday morning. What was intended to be a tribute becomes, technically, trampling on the remains. For the Christian, the body is a seed of resurrection, not fertilizer for the lawn. The location matters. Abraham wanted to be buried in a specific place. Jesus was put in a specific tomb. The place communicates value. But human creativity has no limits, and now the funeral industry offers to turn your loved ones into fashion accessories. Honor or biological fetishism. To begin with, we have to admit something uncomfortable. We live in the era of the I, and narcissism has crossed the last frontier. It is no longer enough for us to personalize our coffee at Starbucks or our Instagram feed. Now we have decided to personalize death itself. Mourning has been transformed into a design industry à la carte. What was once a sacred and community right, today is a menu of commercial options designed to make you feel unique. Nowadays, companies in Switzerland, the United States, and the United Kingdom offer you services that seem taken from a dystopian science fiction novel. The most famous option, and hands down the most expensive, is to compress the ashes of your loved one under high pressure to create synthetic diamonds. The process is fascinating from a technological point of view. They extract the carbon from the cremated ashes, subject it to volcanic temperatures and crushing pressures for months, and voila. You can wear your husband, who has departed, set in a white gold ring. The cost of this commemorative jewel rounds between $3,000 and $20,000, depending on the carats and the cut. The marketing is brutally effective. Love lasts forever, just like a diamond. But here is the catch. You are paying the price of a used car to turn your grandmother into a fashion accessory. And it does not stop there. The market for creative death has exploded with options that will leave your mouth open. Companies like And Vinily exist that press the ashes into functional vinyl records. You can record the voice of the deceased, their favorite music, or simply a sepulchral silence with the clicks and pops produced by the bone particles in the grooves of the record. Literally, you listen to your dead spin at 33 revolutions per minute. Others go further. Pyrotechnics companies offer to mix the ashes with gunpowder to launch your loved one into the sky in a fireworks show. Going out with a bang, they call it. You pay to see your father detonate in a rain of green and red sparks while the guests applaud and drink champagne. And listen to this, because it gets stranger. There are tattoo artists specialized in commemorative ink. They mix a small amount of sterilized ash, or sometimes not so much, with the black ink and inject it under your skin. The idea is visceral, carrying the deceased in your blood, fused with your own biology. Reef balls also exist, where they mix the ashes with pH-neutral cement to create artificial habitats and sink the structure into the ocean. You become a house for fish. Or the option from Celestis, which for an astronomical price, literally, launches grams of the ashes into outer space in a rocket, so that they orbit the Earth or travel to the Moon. Basically, the human body has become raw material, into clay for our artistic or emotional projects. But here is the catch. From a Christian perspective, all this catalogue of novelties borders dangerously on fetishism and a lack of respect. It turns human remains, what the Bible calls the temple of the Holy Spirit, into a trinket, a piece of furniture, or an entertainment show. Historical Christianity has always maintained that the body has an intrinsic dignity. It is not an empty shell that is discarded like an Amazon container once the soul has checked out. That body was washed in the waters of baptism, received the Eucharist, knelt in prayer, and was the vehicle through which that person loved and served God. Therefore, it must not be instrumentalized. It is not an ingredient to make jewelry. Christian critics and theologians argue that this modern trend is a form of Gnosticism 2.0. Gnosticism was an ancient heresy that affirmed that the spiritual is good and matter is bad or irrelevant. If you believe that the body does not matter, then you can play with it, burn it, turn it into ink, or launch it into space. But Christianity is a profoundly materialist religion in the sacred sense. God became flesh. Flesh matters. The resurrection promises a glorified body, not an existence as an ethereal ghost. Worse still, this extreme personalization can be a form of emotional idolatry. We cling to the physical remains in a possessive, almost magical way. Unable to let go of our loved ones into the hands of God, we try to retain them physically. "I always carry him with me on my finger" sounds romantic in a Hollywood movie, but theologically it is problematic. The Christian carries their dead in the liturgical memory and in the active hope of the resurrection, not hanging from the neck in a hand-blown glass vial. An abysmal difference exists between the relics of the saints and these new trinkets. Relics were venerated because the power of God had worked through that body, and they served to direct the mind toward God. A synthetic diamond made of Dad serves to direct the mind toward Dad. The center of gravity changes, from God to man. And think about the final destination of those objects. No one thinks about this when they sign the check, but life continues and objects get lost. What happens to that human diamond ring during a contentious divorce? Who keeps the mother-in-law turned into jewelry? What happens if you are robbed on the street and they take the ring? A normal diamond ring that ends up in a pawn shop is sad. A ring made of human remains that ends up in a pawn shop 50 years later, bought by a stranger who has no idea of its origin, is macabre. A tattoo with ashes fades, wrinkles, and finally disappears or rots when you die. By trying to make the dead eternal through objects, ironically, we make them more temporary and vulnerable to the second-hand market. It is a narcissistic solution that ignores the lasting sacredness of the body. A cemetery is a protected, consecrated, public, and perpetual place. A diamond in a jewelry drawer is not. The question that every Christian must ask themselves before these tempting options is, does this glorify God and honor the hope of eternal life, or does it only satisfy my immediate emotional need to have a totem of security? What most ignore is that the traditional open casket funeral had a vital psychological function. It was not Victorian morbidness. It was not sadism. It was cold, hard reality. We live in a culture that denies death. We hide it in hospitals and hospices, far from sight. When someone dies, we want them to disappear quickly so as not to interrupt our routine of productivity. But seeing the inert body of a loved one is the crucial moment in which your brain, which is desperate to deny the loss, is forced to capitulate before the truth. It is the moment in which the mind says, "He is gone. That body no longer houses the person I love." It is the blow of reality, brutal and necessary, that initiates the healthy grieving process. With the rise of direct cremation, which is the cheapest and most popular option today in the West, that vital step is skipped completely. Someone passes away in the hospital at 3:00 a.m., an industrial services van takes the body through the back door, and 2 weeks later you receive a cardboard or plastic box by certified mail with the ashes. It is antiseptic, it is efficient, it is clean, and it is psychologically dangerous. Pastors, priests, and grief counselors report an epidemic of frozen or ambiguous grief. Many people who choose quick cremation without a ceremony have enormous difficulties processing the death months or years later. They feel a persistent sensation of unreality. It is as if he had gone on a trip and simply has not returned. The brain did not register the end of the movie. The closing credits were missing. The Christian tradition always emphasized the physical accompaniment of the body, washing the body, dressing it in its best clothes, watching over it in the house or in the church. It was a last act of service and love. Jesus himself was anointed with spices and wrapped in linens. He was not instantaneously disintegrated. There was physical contact. There were tears falling on the face of the deceased. There were goodbye kisses on the cold forehead. By turning the process into an invisible industrial procedure, from the hospital to the 1000-degree oven without stops, we lose the human opportunity to take care of what remains of that person one last time. Defenders of Christian burial argue that the funeral must confront us with the rawness of death, the final enemy, so that we can cling with more strength and desperation to the beauty of the promise of the resurrection. If we hide death, if we make it up with diamonds or incinerate it before seeing it, our hope of resurrection becomes abstract, a philosophical idea instead of a visceral necessity. Even if, for economic reasons, you choose cremation, many Christian experts strongly recommend having a wake with the body present before the incineration, giving that space for the physical goodbye, renting the casket if necessary, but allowing the family to see. Because we are physical sensory beings, and we need to see to believe and, above all, to say goodbye. But not all Christians see this as an option or a preference. For one of the oldest and most mystical branches of Christianity, burning a body is not a consumer choice. It is an act of open rebellion against God. If you are a post-conciliar Catholic or Protestant in the West, you have freedom. The Vatican allowed cremation in the 60s, although it continues to recommend burial and prohibits scattering the ashes. But if you are an Orthodox Christian, Greek, Russian, Serbian, Romanian, the oven door is closed with a padlock, chain, and welding. By far, the Orthodox Church maintains the strictest, oldest, and most immovable stance on this topic. For them, cremation is not a valid option under any normal circumstance. And note the fact, this is not a pastoral suggestion, it is an iron rule. In many countries of Orthodox tradition, such as Greece, cremation was illegal or extremely difficult to perform bureaucratically until very few years ago, due to the immense political and social pressure of the Church. There were protests, furious national debates, and threats of excommunication. If an Orthodox Christian chooses to be cremated voluntarily and leaves instructions for it, they face a devastating consequence. They are denied the ecclesiastical funeral. Yes, you read that correctly. The priest will not officiate the service in the church, the eternal memory will not be sung over their remains, and public prayers will not be offered for them in the same way as for a buried deceased. For the modern inclusive mentality, this sounds barbaric and cruel. For the Orthodox mind, it is pure coherence. Why so radical? Why such a scandal over a dead body? For Orthodox theology, the body is not a disposable container. The body of a Christian is being sanctified, deified, theosis, throughout their entire life. That body has been a living temple. It has fasted, it has made prostrations, it has been marked with the sign of the cross, it has eaten the body and the blood of Christ. Treating that body with violence, and they see cremation not as a neutral process, but as extreme violence against the work of God, is to reject the sacredness of matter. They argue that cremation is a deliberate return to paganism. Historically, pagans burned their dead. Christians, following the Jewish tradition, buried them. They say that burial is the only Christian form because it imitates Christ. If Christ was buried in a stone tomb, we are buried. Period. There is no debate about costs, ecology, or lack of space in cemeteries. For them, faithfulness to tradition, with a capital letter, and to sacred symbolism is far above modern convenience or utilitarian logic. The famous Orthodox theologian Kallistos Ware explained this with a clarity that cuts like a knife. Although God is almighty and certainly can resurrect a cremated body, after all, he resurrects the martyrs burned at the stake or eaten by lions, we do not have the right to choose destruction. It is a question of ontological humility. Burial is an act of sowing. St. Paul speaks of the body as a seed that is planted in the earth to be born incorruptible. You do not burn a seed if you want it to sprout, you plant it. We let nature take its course, earth to earth, dust to dust, in its own time, instead of accelerating the process artificially with human technology and fire forced by natural gas. It is the fundamental difference between accepting death with patience and trying to control it or erase it with technological violence. In addition, in the Orthodox liturgy, there is a staggering moment where the priest pours oil and wine over the body in the grave and then throws dirt, making the sign of the cross. It is a final consecration. With cremation, all that liturgy of contact, of care, and of gentle return to the earth is nullified. This firm stance reminds us that, for millions of Christians in the world, this is not a topic of tastes or fashions, but of dogma. It is a battle over what it means to be human, while honor or biological fetishism. To begin with, we have to admit something uncomfortable. We live in the era of the I, and narcissism has crossed the last frontier. It is no longer enough for us to personalize our coffee at Starbucks or our Instagram feed. Now we have decided to personalize death itself. Mourning has been transformed into a design industry à la carte. What was once a sacred and community right, today is a menu of commercial options designed to make you feel unique. Nowadays, companies in Switzerland, the United States, and the United Kingdom offer you services that seem taken from a dystopian science fiction novel. The most famous option, and hands down the most expensive, is to compress the ashes of your loved one under the chemistry of liquid death. To begin with, forget the fire for a moment. The new frontier in the funeral industry does not use flames. It uses water and chemicals. It is called alkaline hydrolysis, or commercially aquamation. And listen to this, it is already legal in more than 20 states of the United States. Even the famous Anglican Archbishop and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Desmond Tutu, chose this method when he departed in 2021. But what is it exactly? Basically, they put the body in a stainless steel cylinder, fill it with a mixture of 95% water and 5% alkaline chemicals, and heat it to 320 degrees Fahrenheit under pressure. In about 4 hours, the flesh, the muscles, and the organs dissolve completely. The only thing that remains are the bones, which are so soft that they can be crushed into white powder by hand and a greenish-brown liquid. Defenders say it is the gentlest option. There is no violent fire, there are no smoke emissions. It is like accelerating the natural decomposition that would occur in the earth with running water. They hand you the ashes, pulverized bones, just like in a normal cremation, but with 30% more quantity because the fire does not consume them as much. However, here comes the trick, and it is what has many Catholic and conservative theologians horrified. What happens with the liquid? That brown liquid contains the amino acids and components that before were the body of your loved one. In most funeral homes, that liquid is thrown down the drain. Yes, it goes straight to the municipal sewage system. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has expressed serious doubts about this. They argue that pouring the liquefied remains of a human being into the same pipe as the waste from the toilet is not treating the body with dignity, it is reducing the person to an industrial effluent. Although the process is chemically clean, the symbolism is devastating. Is the body of the Christian, temple of the Holy Spirit, something that can be flushed down the chain? Despite this, many progressive Christians see it as a superior ethical option because it consumes 90% less energy than fire cremation and does not release pollutants into the atmosphere. For them, the stewardship of the earth justifies the method. But if you think that dissolving in water is radical, wait until you see what the state of Washington legalized in 2019, legally becoming fertilizer for the garden. What most ignore is that the natural organic reduction movement is gaining ground at a staggering speed. States like Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and New York already allow it. The idea is simple. Instead of fighting against decomposition, embalming, or accelerating it violently, cremation, we optimize it. The process works like this. They put the body in a reusable hexagonal container, cover it with wood chips, alfalfa, and straw, and control the airflow. The bacteria do the work. In 30 days, the body, including the bones and the teeth, decomposes completely, thanks to the heat generated by the microbial activity. In the end, the family does not receive an urn. They receive approximately 1 cubic yard of soil rich in nutrients. It is literally fertilizer. You can use that soil to plant an oak, a rose bush, or donate it to a conservation forest. The pioneering company, Recompose, sells this as the final form of giving life after death. But without a doubt, this poses a massive theological dilemma. Christianity teaches dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. Composting fulfills that to the letter. However, many religious leaders feel an instinctive rejection difficult to ignore. The Catholic Church has firmly opposed it. They say that using human remains as fertilizer to grow tomatoes or flowers instrumentalizes the body. It turns the human being into a utility, into agricultural raw material. It is no longer the body of John waiting for the resurrection. It is soil for the garden. It erases the distinction between the human and the animal or the plant. In addition, there is the problem of scattering. If you use that soil in your garden and then sell the house, are you abandoning your grandfather in the backyard of a stranger? Human composting eliminates the grave as a sacred and protected place of memory. However, Christian defenders of composting say, "God made the carbon cycle. My body is going to feed the earth anyway if they bury me. Why not feed a tree that gives oxygen? Is that not a final act of love toward the creation of God?" It is a debate between symbolic dignity and biological utility. And speaking of biology, we have to be honest about what really happens in a modern, traditional burial. So here is the deal. When Christians defend traditional burial, they often defend a commercial invention from 150 years ago, not a biblical practice. Modern burial in the United States is a toxic industrial operation. Everything starts with embalming. This process became popular during the American Civil War to send the bodies of soldiers home. Today it is standard. They replace the blood with gallons of a solution based on formaldehyde and other solvents. Formaldehyde is a dangerous chemical. Basically, we are preserving our loved ones so that they look asleep during the 2-hour wake. The Bible never prescribed chemical embalming. The Jews washed the body and used aromatic spices, myrrh and aloes, to cover the smell, but they did not inject preservatives to stop decomposition. They wanted the body to return to the dust. Modern embalming tries to stop the mandate of God of, "Unto dust shalt thou return." It is a chemical denial of mortality. And then there is the burial itself. We bury millions of tons of steel, caskets, millions of tons of concrete, burial vaults so that the grass does not sink, and thousands of gallons of chemical fluids in the earth each year. In a typical American cemetery, there is enough metal buried to build a skyscraper. This creates cemeteries that are basically underground landfills of non-biodegradable materials. There is no return to the earth. The body decomposes slowly inside a sealed metal box, isolated from the soil. If a Christian of the 1st century saw this, they would think we are crazy. They would think we are trying to preserve the body for this life, instead of delivering it to God for the next one. For that reason, many Christians are returning to the roots, rejecting both the oven and the chemical, and opting for what they call green burial. Cheap, dignified and biblical. What most do not know is that a third way exists. You do not have to choose between burning grandmother or filling her with chemicals. It is called green burial or natural, and it is gaining massive traction among conscious Christians. The premise is simple. Nothing comes between the body and the earth. 1. There is no embalming. The body is kept refrigerated with dry ice until the funeral. 2. There is no metal casket. A simple untreated pine box, a wicker basket, or simply a linen or cotton shroud is used. 3. There is no concrete vault. The body goes straight into the ground. This allows decomposition to occur in a natural and rapid way, returning the nutrients to the earth without polluting it. And listen to this, it is exactly how they buried Jesus. The Gospel of John 19:40 says, "Then took they the body of Jesus, and wound it in linen clothes with the spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury." Simple, humble, direct. Theologically, green burial is powerful. It accepts the reality of death, dust thou art, without violence, fire, and without denial, chemicals. It is an act of faith. I sow this natural body in the earth of God, trusting that He will raise it up. In addition, it is much cheaper. By eliminating the luxury casket, the vault, and the expensive embalming, the price drops dramatically. Cheap, dignified, and biblical. What most do not know is that a third way exists. You do not have to choose between burning grandmother or filling her with chemicals. It is called green burial or natural, and it is gaining massive traction among conscious Christians. The premise is simple. Nothing comes between the body and the earth. 1. There is no embalming. The body is kept refrigerated with dry ice until the funeral. 2. There is no metal casket. A simple untreated pine box, a wicker basket, or simply a linen or cotton shroud is used. 3. There is no concrete vault. The body goes straight into the ground. This allows decomposition to occur in a natural and rapid way, returning the nutrients to the earth without polluting it. And listen to this, it is exactly how they buried Jesus. The Gospel of John 19:40 says, "Then took they the body of Jesus, and wound it in linen clothes with the spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury." Simple, humble, direct. Theologically, green burial is powerful. It accepts the reality of death, dust thou art, without violence, fire, and without denial, chemicals. It is an act of faith. I sow this natural body in the earth of God, trusting that He will raise it up. In addition, it is much cheaper. By eliminating the luxury casket, the vault, and the expensive embalming, the price drops dramatically. Many Christian and Catholic cemeteries are opening green burial sections to accommodate this demand. It is the perfect convergence between environmental stewardship and biblical faithfulness. But while some seek to return to biblical simplicity, others are using technology to try something that the Bible implicitly condemns, trying to never die. Basically, there are people who have so much fear of the end and so little faith in God that they decide to become human popsicles. We talk about cryonics. Companies like Alcor in Arizona charge you fortunes to freeze your body, or only your head, in liquid nitrogen at extreme temperatures immediately after perishing. The bet is this: in the future, technology will be so advanced that they will be able to defrost you, cure what affected you, and bring you back to life. It is the secular and technological version of the resurrection, and for Christianity this is profoundly problematic. First, it is a denial that it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. Hebrews 9:27. Cryonics tries to hack the divine system. It tries to achieve physical immortality in this fallen world, instead of waiting for glorious immortality in the kingdom of God. Second, it reveals where the hope is placed. The Christian waits in Christ. The transhumanist waits in technology. Spending a fortune to preserve your frozen head is the definitive declaration that you do not believe there is anything better on the other side. It is clinging to this life desperately. But is it sin? Most theologians would say that it is, at the very least, a terrible stewardship of money and an idolatry of biological life. In addition, it poses strange questions. If they freeze you and you are legally dead for 100 years, where is your soul? In heaven? And if they revive you, do they pluck you from heaven to return to Arizona? It is a theological absurdity. The obsession with preserving the body at all costs, whether by freezing it or with airtight caskets, is born from fear. And the central message of the Christian Easter is, fear not. The tomb is empty. We do not need to preserve our bodies because God will give us new ones. Then, after seeing the fire, the water, the acid, the earth, and the ice, how should a Christian family decide today? We arrive at the moment of truth. You are going to depart someday. It is the only 100% sure fact of your future, and if you do not leave instructions, your children are going to have to guess while they cry at the funeral home, and the funeral director is going to try to sell them the most expensive package. So, this is the deal. As a Christian, your decision must be based on 3 filters, not on fashion or on the pressure of the salesman. Filter 1. Artificial immortality and its dangers. Close your eyes and imagine total darkness. There are no city lights, only the faint glow of an animal fat candle that smells of rotting meat. You are locked in a mud hut with 8 other people and 3 cows. Outside, plague and war lurk, but the true danger is inside your own daily routine. Cuts that get infected, food that rots, and feudal lords who treat you like property. This is the chronicle of forgotten life, the story of those who never appeared in textbooks until now. But wait, because today the terror is not the mud or the plague. The terror is that when you die, a digital version of you will continue living, trapped on a server forever, forced to talk to your great-grandchildren without your permission. Welcome to the era of digital necromancy. To begin with, we have to face a reality that neither St. Paul nor Moses saw coming, and that probably would have blown their minds. Nowadays, you have 2 bodies, the biological one made of flesh, bone and blood, and the digital one made of zeros, ones and metadata. And even if you bury, burn or throw the first one into the sea, the second one remains alive indefinitely, floating in the cloud like an electric ghost that cannot rest in peace. Basically, social networks are becoming the largest cemetery in human history. Statisticians have already done the math, and the numbers are terrifying. It is estimated that by the year 2070, on platforms like Facebook, there will be more profiles of deceased people than of living ones. We are building a global necropolis. Millions of zombie accounts that continue to receive birthday notifications, where friends write messages on the wall as if the deceased could read them from the beyond. But here is the catch. It is not just about static profiles. Technology has taken a terrifying step toward what some theologians and ethics experts call digital necromancy. Startups exist in Silicon Valley, and this is not an episode of Black Mirror, it is real life. that use artificial intelligence to resurrect your loved ones. The process is chilling because of how simple it is. You feed the IA with the thousands of WhatsApp messages, emails, and voice recordings of the deceased. The machine learns their speech patterns, their inside jokes, their way of using emojis, and even their pauses when speaking. Imagine this. Your father passes away from a sudden heart attack. The pain is unbearable. You cremate him. But that same night, in a moment of weakness, you open your computer and have a real-time text conversation with him. The chatbot answers you, "Hello, son, do not be sad, I am fine." It tells you that bad joke he used to tell at Christmas dinners. For a second, your brain releases dopamine and you feel relief. But it is a false relief. It sounds like science fiction, but services like Project December or Hereafter AI are already exploring this terrain. There was a documentary case in South Korea where a mother reunited with her deceased 7-year-old daughter through virtual reality. The programmers recreated the voice and the face of the girl. The mother, with the glasses on, cried trying to hug empty air, while the avatar of her daughter said to her, "Mom, where have you been?" It is a heartbreaking scene that poses the question: is this comfort or is it psychological torture disguised as technology? From a Christian perspective, this is a spiritual minefield of biblical proportions. The Bible strictly condemns consulting the dead. In the Old Testament, King Saul commits the fatal error of visiting the witch of Endor to invoke the spirit of the prophet Samuel. What he obtained was not advice, it was a sentence of judgment. Trying to maintain active communication with a digital simulation of a deceased person prevents the grieving process that God designed. It is a form of technological idolatry. We refuse to let them go. We refuse to accept the sovereignty of God over life and death. We try to keep a backup copy on our hard drive because we do not trust the eternal destiny of their soul. Without a doubt, the danger is confusing memory with presence. Remembering is biblical. The Israelites raised stones as memorials. But simulating life is deceptive. Christian psychologists warn that this can create a pathological dependency, a frozen grief. The person never moves forward, never reaches acceptance, because every night they chat with the digital ghost. Digital death requires a digital burial. Designating a legacy contact to close your accounts or convert them into a static commemorative page is the modern equivalent of closing the casket lid. But if you think that chatting with an IA is weird, wait until you see where the technology gurus want to bury you, because now they want to sell you plots of land that do not even exist. So this is the deal. The real estate market in the metaverse is exploding, and where there are people, or avatars, there is death. People are spending thousands of real dollars, money they could use to feed their families, to buy plots of digital land in virtual worlds like Decentraland or the Sandbox. And not just to build casinos or virtual clothing stores, but to build pixelated mausoleums. The idea is to sell you virtual immortality. They promise you that your great-grandchildren, in the year 2100, will be able to put on glasses, enter a floating digital cemetery in a neon cloud, and visit your virtual grave. By touching your headstone, a hologram of you will appear telling the story of your life. It sounds futuristic and attractive to a generation obsessed with legacy, but it hides a tremendous spiritual void. For Christianity, this smells dangerously like an ancient heresy called Gnosticism. In the first centuries of the Church, the Gnostics believed that matter was bad. For them, the physical body was a dirty and corrupt prison, and the only thing that mattered was the divine spark, or the spirit, which today we would call data or consciousness. The metaverse is the wet dream of the Gnostic, a world where you can be whoever you want, change appearance with a click, fly, and live without the limitations of the flesh, knee pain, or biological death. But listen to this. Jesus did not save us to live in a simulation. The central message of the gospel is the incarnation, and the Word was made flesh. God did not send a hologram. He did not send a celestial email. He became blood, sweat, tears, and human tissue, and when he departed, his body was not digitized or evaporated into pure energy. It was transformed, but it was still a body. Celebrating a funeral by putting on virtual reality glasses on your sofa while your avatar cries pre-programmed digital tears is a total disconnection from reality. There is something profoundly antiseptic and false in it. The Bible puts a massive emphasis on physical presence. Weep with them that weep, says Paul. It does not say send a sad face emoji. There is something sacramental in the real physical hug, in feeling the trembling of the other person. There is a raw truth in seeing the inert body lowering into the earth, in hearing the dull sound of the first handful of real dirt hitting the wood of the casket, the smell of the flowers mixed with the damp earth, the cold of the cemetery. All that connects us with our mortality and our humanity created from dust. Dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. A virtual funeral eliminates all that. It is hygienic, it does not smell, it does not inconvenience. It is an empty experience that deceives the senses but does not comfort the soul. The Church must resist the temptation to move death to the virtual world. Death is the most physical event that exists, and trying to pixelate it is to deny its weight and its lesson. And speaking of physical bodies and dust, this leads us to the question that has tormented believers since the Romans began to burn martyrs in the Colosseum. This is the million-dollar question, or rather the question of eternity. If my body was burned in a crematorium at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit until it was dust and bone fragments, or if I died in a shipwreck and the fish ate me and dissolved me in the ocean, who am I going to be in the resurrection? How is God going to put all those pieces together? Will I have the face I had at 20 years old when I was young and strong, or the one at 80 full of wrinkles and arthritis? Will my mother recognize me? The biblical answer is a resounding yes, they will recognize you. And we have forensic evidence in the scriptures that is fascinating. First, let's look at the transfiguration. It is a key moment. Jesus goes up the mountain and suddenly Moses and Elijah appear talking with him. Think about it for a second. Moses died centuries before and God buried his body in a secret place. Elijah was taken in a chariot of fire. Their physical bodies had disappeared from history hundreds of years ago. However, when they appear on the mountain, the disciples, Peter, John and James, know instinctively who they are. They maintain their identity. They are not amorphous lights or nameless balls of energy. They are Moses and Elijah. They have personality, form, and are recognizable. This guarantees us that, in the hereafter, we do not lose our individual identity. We do not merge into a cosmic soup. You are still you. Second, and most important, the resurrected body of Jesus. This is the prototype of what awaits us. When Jesus appears to his disciples after the resurrection, he is not a Casper-type ghost. In Luke chapter 24, verse 39, he tells them explicitly, "Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones, as ye see me have." And note the fact, because this is brutal. Jesus asked them for food, and they gave him a piece of a broiled fish. He ate before them. His resurrected body could interact with the physical world, digest food and be touched, but at the same time, it had new properties. He could appear and disappear in closed rooms without using the door. He was physical, but transphysical. He was a superior type of matter. The craziest thing is that he kept his scars. Thomas could touch the marks of the nails. This suggests that our history, our battles, and perhaps our war marks are not erased, but are glorified as trophies of grace. This tells us something incredible about cremation versus burial. People sometimes are afraid of cremation because they think, what if God does not find my pieces? It is a limited human thought. Think of the universe as a large computer and of God as the supreme programmer. It does not matter what happens to your hardware, your biological body, on this earth. If you burn, disintegrate in an explosion, or the sharks eat you, God has the master plan, the source code of your ADN and of your soul. The Apostle Paul uses the analogy of the seed in 1 Corinthians. He says that when you plant a wheat seed, the seed has to die and decompose so that the new plant is born. The plant looks different from the seed, it is much more glorious, but it comes from it. So is the resurrection. God rebuilds your identity in a glorified body that is you, but improved. It is the version 2.0 of you, without pain, without cancer, without myopia, without depression, but unmistakably you. So the fear that cremation erases your identity is unfounded. Your identity does not reside in your ashes. It resides in the memory of God. And the memory of God is perfect. He calls the stars by name. Surely he will not forget what your smile was like. But knowing that God takes care of the difficult part, the resurrection, it is your turn to take care of the boring but vital part, leaving your papers in order down here. Dying messy is an act of selfishness. It sounds harsh, but it is the truth. If you love your family, you cannot leave them a legal and financial puzzle while they are crying over your loss. I have seen exemplary Christian families fall apart completely in a matter of weeks because Dad did not want to talk about death and did not leave anything written. Siblings who stop talking to each other for a plot of land, widows who cannot access bank accounts to pay the light bill because they do not have the passwords. Here you have the tactical checklist that every responsible Christian must complete this very week. Do not postpone it. 1. The financial and legal will. This is basic. Do not let your children fight over the house or the old car. The Bible says in Proverbs that a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. If you leave a legal chaos, you are sowing discord, not blessing. Make a will before a notary. Today, specify who gets what. Eliminate ambiguity. 2. The Advanced Health Directive, Living Will. This is crucial in the era of modern medicine. If you have an accident and remain in a coma or with brain death, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to keep you connected to machines indefinitely? Do you want them to donate your organs? Leave in writing your wishes about life support. Free your wife or your children from the crushing guilt of having to make that impossible decision at 3 a.m. in a hospital hallway. If you decided it, they are only executing your will, and that gives them peace. 3. The written funeral plan. Please do not say the typical phrase, "When I die, do whatever you want. Throw me in the river if you want." That is not humility. That is a terrible burden for those who remain. They will want to honor you, and, when in doubt, they will spend money they do not have on the most expensive casket out of guilt. Write, "I want to be buried," or "I want to be cremated." "I want the service to be in my local church." Be specific. If you prefer cremation because it is more economical and usually is a third of the cost of a traditional burial, write it clearly. "I choose cremation to take care of the family finances." That way no one will feel guilty for being stingy with Dad. 4. The digital legacy. This is new but vital. Who has the password for your phone, for your email, for your cloud with all the family photos from the last 15 years? If you die and your iPhone is locked, those photos are lost forever. The privacy policies of Apple and Google are impenetrable. Use the legacy contact function that Facebook and Apple have now. Leave a physical notebook or a secure password manager with the master keys and tell only one person of trust where it is. Prevent your digital life from becoming an inaccessible crypt. 5. The ethical or spiritual will. What most ignore is that this is worth more than any bank account. It is a letter, an audio recording, or a video where you leave your values, your testimony of faith, your blessings for your children, and your final advice. It is your spiritual legacy. In the Bible, Jacob gathered his sons on his deathbed and prophesied over them, giving them direction. Do the same. Grab your cell phone, record yourself for 5 minutes saying, "Children, I love you. I believe in Jesus Christ with all my heart. I know where I am going. My greatest desire is that you follow God. Do not fight over money." That video will be the greatest treasure they will have when they miss you. It will be worth more than any life insurance. 6. Design your liturgy. Choose the hymns. Choose the biblical passages. If you do not do it, the pastor on duty or the funeral home will put generic music or whatever is in fashion. Make your funeral a last service of worship directed by you. Ensure that even in your casket or urn, your story is pointing to Christ and not just to what a good person you were. If you do these 6 things, your departure will be a final blessing, an ordered transition full of peace, instead of a logistical and financial trauma for those who stay. Because at the end of the day, it does not matter how many plans you make. The only thing that really counts is where you are going when you cross the threshold. At the end of the day, whether they bury you in a polished oak casket that cost $5,000, whether they cremate you and your ashes rest in a marble niche, or whether you return to the cycle of nature in a green burial, the fundamental truth of Christianity remains intact and immovable. The grave is not the end, it is a door. The secular world, atheism and materialism look at death and see a concrete wall. End of transmission, black screen. That is why there is so much despair today. That is why the billionaires of Silicon Valley are investing millions in trying to cure death, freeze their brains in liquid nitrogen, or become synthetic diamonds. They try to cling to the dust because they believe that the dust is all there is. They are in a panic to cease existing. The Apostle Paul stands before that fear and launches the greatest challenge in history in 1 Corinthians 15. "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? It is a mockery of death. For the Christian, death has been defanged. It bites, yes, and it hurts, but it no longer has poison. For you, if you are in Christ, the narrative is radically different. You know that you are not a biological accident. You know that the architect of the universe knows every atom of your being, every thought, every tear. You know that he promised in Revelation 21 something that no technology, no metaverse, and no IA can offer. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Cremation is a valid, economical, and dignified option if it is done with respect. Burial is a powerful and beautiful symbol of the hope of the resurrection, like a seed waiting for spring. But neither of the two saves you. Only faith saves you. Do not obsess over the container. The container is going to break, wrinkle, and decompose anyway. Obsess over the content. Take care of your soul. Ensure that when that last breath leaves your lungs, and it will sooner or later, you are not entering the darkness terrified, but waking up to the true light, hearing that familiar voice that tells you, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." The history of humanity began in a Garden Eden, and the Bible ends in a garden city, the New Jerusalem. In the middle there are graves, there are hospitals, there are ashes, and there are painful goodbyes. But in the end, there is life. Life with a capital letter. And that, my friends, is the only truth that matters when the curtain falls. And now I want to ask you something serious. If you knew that you had 1 week of life left, what is the first thing you would fix on your checklist? The will, the bank keys, or recording that video for your family? Leave it for me in the comments. It is a conversation that we need to have. And if this video has made you think about your legacy beyond the digital, give it a like and subscribe. See you in the next one, where we will continue exploring the truth without filters.